this is just another example of how the West wants to provoke never-ending conflict. Now, what they say about this conflict and the reality of them joining NATO is completely contradictory. So what they will say, they say that we have to have Sweden join NATO because Russia is invading their neighbors, and we need to join NATO to keep Sweden safe. The only thing that would put Sweden in danger is if they join NATO. Sweden already gets security assurances as an EU state. We covered this over a year ago. Look at my hotspot history. But you can just search my Twitter or you can search our account. Actually, I might find it because I know I fucking covered this shit. Where they get EU security assurances. Also, Ukraine is not a member of NATO, and they are still providing assistance to Ukraine. So if Russia did invade Sweden, which they would never do, the West would still intervene. The only thing that could possibly put Sweden in danger is if they join NATO, which is a red line that Russia has said for years and years. This breaks a neutrality agreement that Sweden and Russia had for decades. So just like the Minsk Accords, just like Europe has done to Russia for decades, it's been broken agreement after broken agreement after broken agreement. Now, here's the headline for people only listening. Sweden officially joins NATO, ending decades of post-World War II neutrality. They say that like it's a good thing, my friends. That's a horrible thing. National security experts, and I'm not talking about peace activists, but national security experts have been saying for years that a buffer between Russia and the West is key for maintaining peace. Swedish peace activists have been stressing the fact that we have to be a buffer. Our neutrality stance helps leads to and elevates the peace process. So now Sweden and the West is more than happy to throw that away because the goal, and I cannot stress this enough, is not to deter Russian aggression. The deter is not for peace and stability. The goal is for never-ending conflict. So I got two short clips I'm going to show you guys. I'm going to show you guys Blinken talking about this. Here are just headlines. Sweden's NATO ascensions in era of going alone security. You know that thing that's been working for Sweden for decades? Now, I don't want you guys to misunderstand this. Oh, yeah, Rob, this is a good comment. I'm glad whenever I can see some of these comments. When was Sweden last invaded by anyone? Exactly. So why would you have to join NATO? Unless NATO is a just arms manufacturing, money laundering scheme, which it is. But I don't want people to understand. This is what I was about to say earlier. I don't want people to think that Sweden is like pacifist country. And I've learned this because I used to be one of those people. Look, if you look at my old tweets, I did this when I was looking at receipts. My old praise of Sweden and Finland is so cringe because I told you guys I went through like a social democrat phase before I became a Marxist. I'm very open about my mistakes I made. And I used to be like, man, Finland and Sweden is much better than the West. When they are, social democracy is better than neoliberal capitalism. But I used to elevate them in a way they didn't deserve because they got their wealth and ill-gotten means through colonialism, through exploitation. And also, do you guys know Sweden is one of the largest arms shippers in the world? In fact, Sweden, actually, let me show you guys the receipt. I didn't have it saved, but you guys know I love showing you guys receipts. Yemen arms. Sweden was one of the largest arms dealers during the genocide against Yemen. So Bernie Crats, social democrats, they tend to whitewash what Sweden and Finland is, but Sweden is a arms dealing country. Let me see if I can find one more receipt for you guys so you guys will believe me. Arms industry. Sweden arms exports rose 18. I didn't see this one. Sweden arms exports rose 18% in 2023. Wow. Is Sweden complicit in war crimes in Yemen? Yeah, they are. Right? So this is one of the things I used to do. I used to praise Sweden. They don't deserve praise. If you're honest, anyone can admit that having a welfare form of capitalism is inherently better than neoliberal capitalism, but that doesn't mean you're still a moral state. It still doesn't mean you're an ideology that we should strive to achieve. Now, before I wrap up this segment, I'm gonna show you guys just a little bit what Blinken says. I don't have to. I may interrupt it. We see. I was about to say I don't want to make promises because we nearly. I don't want to be too long on this. So I want to play. I just want to show a little bit of the comments, and then I'm gonna show you guys a segment I've seen from Democracy Now, because the Swedish peace movement has been against this from day one. Even Democracy Now did a segment covering this over a year ago. I'm gonna show you guys just a little bit of that. But here's Anthony Blinken. I'll just play this so you guys see what the State Department is saying, and we move on.
Our NATO alliance, our defensive alliance, is now stronger and larger than it's ever been. But I think if you step back and think of where we were 3 years ago, none of this was foreordained, and in fact, none of this was foreseeable. Sweden had a 200-year-old policy of non-alignment. And before Putin's re-invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022, if you looked at the polling, less than 1/3 of Swedes supported joining NATO. This was part and parcel of Sweden's history. And then everything changed. After the invasion, 3/4 of the Swedish people made clear their desire to join. Swedes realized something very profound, that if Putin was willing to try to erase one neighbor from the map, then he might well not stop there. And if he was
I'm sorry, I must interrupt at this point. I'm sorry, guys, but you guys see, this is the lie that they keep spreading. Putin, in multiple interviews, not just the Tucker interview, but multiple interviews, keep saying that they have absolutely no plans to invade any other country outside of Ukraine. They view Ukraine as a red flag that has been in position for years. In fact, Russia actually caved. Let me see if I can find this receipt. I'll let it play because I'm gonna try to find this receipt where Russia said at the beginning of this conflict that if Sweden and Finland join NATO, that it would trigger possibly a nuclear response and an escalation. Then they said that not because they were serious, but because they were trying to deter the West from doing something like that. Then the West, because they're fucking crazy, decided to call their bluff. They decided to call their bluff. Here it is. I actually found it. Wow. So I was here's what article I reported on almost 2 years ago. I remember reporting on this very specifically. Russia warns of nuclear hypersonic deployment if Sweden and Finland join NATO. And let me see if I can find another receipt. I may not find it, but if I can't find it, please take my word for it, because I reported on this earlier before. And Russia later walked this back and like, oh yeah, whatever. At first they was like, Sweden and Finland join NATO is a red line. It will lead to drastic escalation. And then once they realized that Sweden and NATO and Finland about to join NATO, they was like, all right, whatever, fuck it. We don't really care. Fuck it. They're like, we don't really care. Fuck it. We just said that because we didn't want you guys them to join NATO, but we don't want to start a world war. So fuck it. That's essentially what they said. It was the same thing with China, where remember when Nancy Pelosi went to Taiwan and China was like, bro, if you go to Taiwan, we're about to fuck shit up, bro. I promise you. They was bluffing, and they never did shit. You guys notice this happens all the time? This happens all the time where countries had to say crazy shit to stop the United States from doing crazy shit, and then the United States do crazy shit, and then they force us to walk it back. That's what the United States have done to China over and over again. That's what the United States did to Russia over and over again in Ukraine. So actually, where was I? I kind of got off. But anyway, I wanted to correct this lie by Blinken because they use it to justify continuing conflict with Russia. They use it to justify having Sweden join NATO, having Japan double their military budget, having these countries. Apparently, I just learned this looking for another story. Sweden increased their arms export by 18%. Actually, where is it? Here it is. I'll put it on the screen. I just found it looking for something else. Sweden's arm exports rose 18% in 2023. You have the German military that is becoming militarized for the first time since the Nazis. They were the country that decided to become more pacifist, and now they're doubling down on military spending based on this lie that Putin plans to invade Europe, which did not serve them in their interests at all. And if you really believe that, why are you pretending that Russia is so weak that they can't defeat Ukraine? If your guys' narrative is true, that Russia can't defeat Ukraine, why would anyone be worried about them storming over Europe? Doesn't make sense at face value. You guys see this headline. Germany pledges to make its military the backbone of defense in Europe. So I'll just play. We already over a little bit over time. I'll just play a little bit more Blinken, and then I'm gonna show just a little bit at Democracy Now.
Continue. But would-be aggressors everywhere would get the message that it was open season. And so the Swedish people stood up not only for their own country, but stood up to the common responsibility that we share to try to make sure that the very foundations of the international system that we all rely on to have peace, to have security, to have opportunity, when they were challenged, we were there to defend them. Sweden was there to defend them. And I think what this tells us even more profoundly is the reaffirmation of Sweden's democratic character.
Oh, Jesus Christ. I think we can wrap up here. We don't hear that bullshit, but you got during this press conference, I watched the whole thing so I can help sum it up. He also had this dipshit speak. Is that the prime minister? Who's that? Yeah, they had the Swedish prime minister. I don't know why I didn't catch that the first time. I thought it was just some dipshit. I guess it's the Swedish prime minister. So they had this joint press conference where they talking about how great it was to join NATO. They're essentially talking about this is for peace and security. This is not for peace and security. This is the only thing that could put Sweden in conflict. Sweden's policy of neutrality not only benefited the world, but clearly it benefited them. Now, I'm going to skip ahead to, because Democracy Now! Usually do a long intro. For a second time, I'm going to skip the intro. In the beginning, remember, this video is a year ago. I'm showing you guys this because this is one of them. This is a really good segment for Democracy Now! I have a ton of criticism of Democracy Now!, but I will acknowledge when they do good work. This is a good segment. I saw this segment a year ago. I was like, damn, I can't believe they're airing this. Because to sum up the intro, they essentially talk about how you had these Swedish prime ministers. You notice that Sanna Marin, she's no longer prime minister. All these people who supported this war, all these people who support NATO, they're all gone. Zelensky about to be fucked too. Meanwhile, Putin is stronger than ever. Isn't that interesting? So I'm summing the intro. They essentially talk about everything that we just talked about. Essentially, with Sweden joining NATO. They actually do a good job explaining why Sweden joining NATO is bad. But what I want to show you guys, I'm going to show you this clip from her because she's a Swedish anti-war activist. And I'm showing you guys this because I can't stress enough how the anti-war movement in Sweden is being completely repressed, being completely silenced. The propaganda that Sweden and Finland have been subjected to has been insane in order to get them in NATO. Everyone who's been speaking out against this have been retaliated against. And obviously, since this segment was a year ago, these people end up losing. But don't take my word for it. I want you guys to listen to her, who's actually an anti-war activist. I think she's part of this anti-war group that is like the oldest anti-war peace group in Europe, something like that. But anyway, I let the clip play. I think it's very fascinating.
Group. Some say it's the oldest in the world, founded in
Oh,
1883.
go back.
Provocation Society, the country's oldest peace group. Some say it's the oldest in the world, founded in 1883. Agnes, welcome to Democracy Now! Your response. I mean, this is an incredible, even seeing these two women, which is historic. They are standing there, though, saying they want to join this military alliance, NATO. If you can...
Now, let's unpack that. Because I remember when the Finnish and the Swedish prime minister was elected, everyone was like, isn't this great thing? We have two progressive women, female leaders. And then those leaders end up becoming some of the most unhinged, pro-Nazi, pro-war politicians in their country's history. Isn't that interesting? The first ever female Swedish prime minister was the one who ended Sweden neutrality. So they kind of point that out. You can see the disappointment, but I'll let it continue.
Saying they want to join this. I mean, this is an incredible, even seeing these two women, which is historic. They are standing there, though, saying they want to join this military alliance, NATO. If you can respond.
Well, the Swedish Peace and Arbitration Society, we are against the Swedish membership in NATO, and that therefore I'm, as a feminist, extra sad that the steps are taking so quickly now towards the membership. And the main reason that we don't think it would make us safer or the world more secure. It would make us part of a nuclear doctrine, and our possibility to be a voice for democracy, prevention, and disarmament would decrease.
And Agnes, could you talk about whether, since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, popular public support for joining NATO has increased in Sweden, as it has in Finland, where reportedly recent polls suggest almost 70% of Finns support joining NATO?
Yeah, the recent debate in Sweden has been very narrow and pro-NATO, I would say. But the polls they have still that's been made, they still don't show support from a majority of the people of Sweden. So I think that it has been growing, the support, but at the same time, it's been the only option presented to us. I
remember at the time when I reported this, I seen a poll where Swedish people was around 50-50 in their support of NATO. And now remember, and I think they're going to explain this here in the segment, one of the reasons why this is, and one of the reasons why the numbers tipped in Finland, even though people used to be against it, is because the same unhinged pro-Ukraine propaganda we've seen in the United States and the West, Sweden and Finland got that, but like on steroids. Any Swedish politician who spoke out against joining NATO was branded as a Putin puppet, as an agent of Russia. All these peace groups was branded as pro-Russian. And people started to fold. So that what happened, but I'll let this continue for a little bit here.
Growing the support, but at the same time, it's been the only option presented to us by the media, more or less. And I think it's really important, this kind of big decision, that it has to be a wide debate, and it has to be, the people must be included in this kind of really big change in our policy.
Agnes Hellström, for people who aren't familiar with Sweden's history, if you can talk about the history of neutrality and why it is so central to Sweden's identity.
I'll wrap up after this. I think this will be good.
Yes, I don't remember the exact year when we decided on the neutrality policy, and it's also been abandoned for a more non-aligned policy, military. But it's been a country that had peace for more than 200 years, and a lot to thank has been our choice to be more of a voice for diplomacy and for disarmament, and to in the international forum represent those issues more than to take side or to to choose an ally in that kind of way as NATO is.
I guess as members,
I'll wrap up with that question there. I wanted to show this because she's a activist. I think this is it. I'm trying to get the name of the organization again. She for the Swedish Peace and Arbitration Society. Apparently, this is one of the longest lasting pro-peace, anti-war movements in Europe. So the left in Sweden was against joining NATO. But you got to notice how in the UK and in the West, the NATO left is cheering this on. There have been a coordinated effort to turn the left-wing position into supporting NATO. And it worked on the Bernie Sanders left. It worked on the Sam Cedars, the Emma Vigelands, the Nina Turners. I still remember on the show, I covered this a long time ago, how Nina Turner, like, yeah, of course I support the funding for the Ukraine war. They all NATO leftists. Meanwhile, the real left in Sweden and Finland are opposing this. The real left in the UK, not the Labour Party, their neocon party, but the George Galloways, who just won. They are being utterly suppressed by the fascist movement that has grown and reached its peak in Europe. These anti-war voices have been silenced, and the fact that Sweden has given up over 200 years of peace, centuries of peace based on their neutrality program for NATO? Man, people have no idea how badly they've been sold out by their governments.